Good morning. Good morning. All right. Today's a little different. If you're a guest with us for the first time, welcome. And so it'll be a little different on normal service. My name is Tim. I'm obviously the pastor here. I guess it'd be not obvious if you're a first-time guest, but for those who are regular, it does. Good morning, Staunton campus and Head at campus. Those watching our iCampus today. Today we're having not a special guest and an outsider, but one of our very own will be speaking to us today. It's what we call a Faith and Science Sunday. His name would be James. We call him Jimbo. All right, his name is Dr. James Bray. He is a professor of biology at Blackburn College, and he will be speaking to us on some various topics. So it's not so much a topic, but just on science, okay, and how it interacts with faith. And so the general topic is how does faith and science coexist? And then we're going to do this again in 2 weeks, a different set of things, and we're going to repeat some, not repeat. We're going to do some others of these. So here's what I want to ask you to do. So you should be getting on Mondays and Fridays. You should be getting from me an email, okay, different emails. But so on one of those, probably tomorrow, but on one of those, I will send you a reminder of what I'm going to say to you, that if you have specific science questions, that you can actually ask them, okay? Not that we're going to answer those in 2 weeks from now, on May 6th, but you can ask those questions, and that we're going to try to begin to start answering some of those kind of questions, okay? We may answer those in a video. We may answer those in a service format where we just say, because like this time, instead of us sitting at a table and us asking questions, like last year or 2 years ago, we did something like this, and I sat at a table with Jimbo, because the plan was I was going to ask him questions. I asked Jimbo a question. We're sitting at a table. I said, Jimbo, here's the question. And instead of Jimbo answering the question and then sitting down and asking him another question, Jimbo gets up and he takes off. So this time, I'm going to invite Jim on the stage, and I'm going to sit down and let Jim do his thing, right? But anyway, so we may do a question and answer thing like that, or it may just be 10 minutes of a service where we just answer one question, and then we go a different thing in the service, right? So there's lots of ways we may do it, but if you have some specific science questions, like Jimbo is tailoring this service, and he will make the next service, on May 6th, on things that he thinks that we want to hear about science and how it interacts with our faith. But if you have questions, if you have things that you've been wondering, or things that you struggle with, or that you think would be good for us to kind of wrestle through or maybe things he says today that cause you to wrestle, he's going to approach it as a scientist from a biblical perspective. So ask the question. And so we're going to make those questions answered. So we may come back and do that in the fall. So it's not going to be something like we do like every month or whatever it is. But so whether we do it in 10 minutes in the service, whether we do a video and we show it, whether we just post it on YouTube, or send out as an email response, ever how we do that, we will begin to answer some questions and give our local scientists an opportunity to communicate with you, and you an opportunity to get some questions answered. Everybody cool with that? All right. Jimbo, come up and wear our stage out, brother.
I will try not to run across the stage, but no promises. First question is, how many of y'all were here the last time? Just raise your hand. And you came back. All right, we're off to a good start here. So when Tim approached me about kind of thinking about this again, and ideas of, how could we communicate science, faith, do they coexist, things of that nature, the first thought I had is, well, can they coexist? Well, if I'm standing here as a scientist on a stage preaching to a church, so to speak, then I could just do this. I could just, yes, and I could be done. But all right, well, we'll do a little bit more than that. When he said last time we did this, that as soon as I got up here, I just went, he didn't mean that I left. He meant that, well, okay, you'll see, just hang on. So as we were doing this, one of the things he said was, it kept coming up over and over. He said, Jimbo, what I want you to do this time is I want you to use your filing system because you as a scientist, you think a certain way. And so I want you to use your filing system. And this filing system kept coming up. And so after we met, I left and I sat down in my truck. And first thing I thought, I kind of looked around and I just grabbed out my phone and I took a picture. And so the first slide to start all this is this is my mail filing system in my truck. And I wanted to blame my kids for the chocolate milk and the candy bar wrapper, but, well, I'm just going to go ahead and admit it because I am in God's house, right? So, yeah, that's mine. But I'm recycling. That's what I'm doing, just in case you're asking. So then I thought a little bit further, and I was like, okay, well, I get back to work later that day, and so I walk into my office. I think, I'll take a picture of my desk. So there's my filing system at work. And I was like, oh, man, I forgot to take the bag of Tootsie Rolls off of there. I promise I did not eat the whole 3 pounds of them yet. And so here, I'm going to guess something right now. And the reason I brought this up, this is really my filing system. Nothing was staged here. You can ask my wife or my kids, or if you've ever been around me, that is my filing system. And I put that up for a reason. Because I'm guarantee you right now, everybody that's involved with this is in one of two categories. You're either sitting there going, yep, that's about right. Or you kind of nudge somebody, see, I'm not the only person that does that. I told you I shouldn't be on hoarders. That's the way some people just do things. Or on the other hand, you're probably sitting there going, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can listen to somebody that does something like that. So, and that's really what happens a lot of times when we throw these terms, science and faith, out. Even though they can easily and should coexist, oftentimes we throw them out, and what happens is that we think there's some kind of dichotomy or some either-or situation. So what I hope I can do before today's over is kind of draw you back in, whether you were nudging and saying, yep, that's the way I do things, or oh my goodness, I didn't see anybody get up and leave, so that's a good thing. And so hopefully I can kind of draw those two things together and we can see how this works. So as a scientist and a teacher, one of the first things we really like to do is we just love definitions. And as a professional scientist, and the top scientists in the world, we all kind of do the same thing. When we want a definition, we go to Google. And then we look up Wikipedia, which is a lot better than it used to be. So I'm going to throw this up. So here is a definition of science. And you may also notice that the way we did today with the bulletin was it's a blank because I don't want you to write this stuff down, but there may be things that you want to write down through this. So I don't want to direct that in any way. So we put this up here, and of course the first thing, there's science. And then there's that goofy pronunciation that none of us understands what that actually means, turn the letters upside down and things. Or if you're like me and you're dyslexic, it still just looks like science, so we're okay. And the description, as you start reading through that, now one thing I will say, it's one big word, one big run-on sentence. So kind of keep that in mind. That's a good thing. But a lot of big, as my grandpa used to say, 50-cent words where a nickel would work. A lot of stuff in there about systematic and studying, encompassing big ideas, blah, blah, blah. The last two are kind of interesting, observation and experiment, because those really kind of get at the heart of science. In that, and I think that's why I became a scientist. As most of you can probably tell by now, I'm not from here. I'm from a little further south than here. And honestly, most of science starts like this, whether scientists will admit it or not. It kind of starts with, here, hold my beverage of choice, and watch this. That's the way science works. So observation, experiment. So we'll come back to a little bit more of that. But I also, as a teacher, we love definitions. And then there's another thing that's become like this wonderful teaching tool that kind of reaches the masses, and it's called memes. So we're going to have a few memes thrown in here for good measure. So thinking about this definition of science, and we'll come back to that again when we get into more of the faith side of it, but I was kind of cruising through memes, and I come up with this. And don't worry about that guy in the upper left corner. He doesn't really count for much. But as we look through these things, you notice it's the what so-and-so or so-and-so or so-and-so think I do. But as a scientist, I'll tell you it's more like this. Lower left corner, that's Monday. If I'm lucky, kind of over there next to him, the fellow with hair that looks like mine most days, Einstein, that's me on Tuesday. Maybe in the morning, and then Tuesday afternoon looks more like the lower corner. It's really cool to try to grow a human ear cartilage on a mouse, but we'll put that later in the month, you know. But science kind of encompasses all these things. And if you're not like me, your desk would look like that. See, I just kind of spread the love a little bit. But science is a number of different things. And then as a science teacher, we get to add another little perspective there. So throw this one up. And as I was looking through this, I was thinking, okay, does this Monday, Tuesday thing apply? No, this is most of the lower corner, that's 8 o'clock. Maybe 9 o'clock in the middle. Boy, I had a good moment there. 10 o'clock grading papers. Then I'm back up there looking like the guy. And unless you're a marine biologist or a marine biology teacher, you're probably never going to see the one in the upper right corner. Just that doesn't happen, I guess. So thinking through some of these things, and then I thought kind of the last one to kind of jump into the actual science thing was one of my other favorite memes. And it kind of looks like this. So, okay, if you ever just kind of wondered, so take a minute, soak that in, right? You get down to the bottom, and okay, that was me 20-something years ago maybe. But there are a couple of problems with this, because if you notice, you look at the guy, you know, we can all be heroes, right? And you look at him, all right, first of all, he has both of his gloves on, or gloves at all, and I don't see any holes in them. And there is not a scientist that does anything that has a lab coat that looks like that. It still has its sleeves. They've not been burned off and things of that nature. So now that we kind of have an idea of what a lot of people see science or scientists as, I want to take a little bit of a different approach, and I want to actually look at science as what it really is, not what it is in memes or things of that nature. So basically, here's a way to look at science. And I'm going to challenge you with something that a lot of scientists may not necessarily say, but if they're scientists, they would agree with this. There's 3 things you won't find in science. And that first one is there's no proof, there's no truth, and there's no fact. Those 3 things, oftentimes people that write about science, talk about science, don't really do a lot of science, they'll talk about how you can prove things in science. Well, I'm here to tell you, you don't do that. And I'll get to a little bit of why a little bit later. And I'll also tell you that if you're looking for truth in science, you're reading the wrong books. I'll also tell you if you're looking for facts in science, that's a problem. It's kind of along this idea of, you know, you may have heard the just the facts, ma'am, right? That was an old police show. That was not science. And so when somebody talks about science proving something, or that's a fact, then they don't really understand what the process of science is. And so I'm going to put up kind of one word so we can have all these long definitions for science, and even though it's just a one sentence kind of run-on thing, I'm going to put up kind of one statement about science, and this is it, that science is tentative. So I do like a couple of the 50-cent words if they really say something that's important. And tentative is one of those things that is really important when it comes to science and understanding what we actually do. Tentative has a pretty specific meaning, and it's a simple one. It can change. That's really what science is about. Science is not something that you can prove, and it's not something that is a fact, because it is tentative, because it is ever-changing. Years ago, I just did away with all the textbooks in my classes. I do not use a textbook because, well, by the time it's published, revised, and printed, it's already out of date because of this very idea that science is tentative. And now to kind of give you an idea of what I mean by the tentative nature of science, or the fact that science is tentative, well, think about this. We'll go back a few years to kind of the mid-1800s. And some of the most notable scientists at the time had a very, very well-supported, very well-conceived idea called spontaneous generation of life. And it was a pretty straightforward thing. It kind of makes sense if you look at it. So for example, if I had a nice clean floor, kind of like this, and I wanted mice, there's a real simple recipe for it. They even had books on this. You could get the right amount, right types of grains, put it in the floor, come back, 24, 48 hours, you have mice. Spontaneously generated. It's like they just popped out of those little grains of rice, which would normally grow rice or normally grow wheat if you were wheat, corn, what have you. But it was like if you put them in the right circumstances, mice. Very well understood scientific idea at the time. So if we want to call that a fact, get ready, it's about to change, right? There was another one along the same lines of, if I take a piece of meat, and why anybody would want to do this, I do not understand. But take a piece of meat, set it on the table, walk away. Come back, again, 24, 48 hours, maggots just appear out of that muscle that was once meat. Now I can produce maggots, spontaneously generated on it. And then along that time, so back to the tentative nature, well-conceived ideas, well-written, well-published, books on how to do it. And scientists of the day, that was the way they looked at things, and it made sense to them. And then this guy came in by the name of Louis Pasteur. Some of you may be familiar with the name. All of us are familiar with the process of pasteurization, right? And he says, all right, I'm a scientist. I'm not going to just take these things that you're saying that do like this and I can get that. I'm going to do a little thing we call an experiment, and I'm going to put 2 pieces of meat on the table. Cut it from the same thing. Take it and cut it in half so I have some control. I'm going to leave one of them setting just like you did. I'm going to take the other one, and I'm going to put a bell jar over it, a glass jar that covers it. And then I'm going to pour a little bit of wax around the bottom of that to seal it. Let's see what happens. A couple days later, maggots on one side. What do you think was under the sealed glass jar? A piece of meat, right? A few days later, still a piece of meat. Probably a piece of meat with some fingerprints that started to rot in it because they didn't know about hygiene and washing their hands. They figured that out later, and blister and all that stuff. But anyway, no maggots. That one simple experiment where somebody looked at it and said, I don't really think that's what's happening. Let's try this. I guess for him it would have been, here, hold my milk, right? But anyway, so the idea of the tentative nature is that if we keep trying to understand things, the process of science would be another way to think about it, then there are no facts. Prior to what Louis Pasteur did, there was a fact of spontaneous generation. Now there's no longer that fact. So to use that term is really kind of a misnomer. And we can try to understand things, and then we can try to take that understanding and apply it in the real world and see how it fits, see how it doesn't. And we're always making changes in that. So given that, there's a couple other terms that are often kind of thrown out in science. We talk about science being tentative. We can also talk about this. You may hear these terms, that's my hypothesis, or, oh, that's just a theory, right? You may even see cases where those two terms are used interchangeably, that, hypothesis, theory means the same thing. In science, they do not. They have very specific meaning, and they tie back to exactly the kind of things that someone like Louis Pasteur did back in the 1800s to kind of show us that some of these ideas really aren't right. They're really not facts. And so I'll kind of tie these two terms in, hypothesis and theory. Hypothesis There's a very easy way to define that word. So unlike Wikipedia and Google that have these nice long definitions, I like simple ones. And so I'll give you a simple definition for hypothesis. It's a testable statement, period. So whatever you may read about hypotheses and things of that nature, when it really gets right down to it, if it's a hypothesis in science, it is a testable statement. So in other words, I make some kind of statement that I can devise some kind of test, some kind of experiment to either support my idea, my testable statement, or not. That's really what we do in science. We try something, we see if it works. If it does, it tells us something. If it doesn't, it tells us even more most of the time. And so I'll kind of give you an idea of how this hypothesis fits in science. How many of y'all have heard of the scientific method? You know, we hear a lot about that. Scientific method, throw that out the window. The scientific method, when you say method, that's like a cookbook. That's a recipe. You have to follow all these steps to get exactly the outcome that you want, right? If that was the only thing we did in science, well, we'd be in trouble in a lot of ways. Science is more of a process. And so there's not necessarily an end point in science at any point in time. And I'll tell you a little bit about what I mean, and I'll tie a hypothesis into that. If we were to walk outside, and let's say it's a nice sunny day, and you look up, and you're going to say, ooh, the sky is a wonderful shade of... It's a sunny day. It wasn't raining. What? The sun, what color is the sky? It's a wonderful shade of... Thank you. And so it's this wonderful shade of blue. Now, one of the number one things that ties into that in science is this wonderful thing called curiosity. So I look up and I see that the sky is blue. And you probably wonder why there's not many cats in science. Well, there's your answer. Think about that one for a minute. Hey, that one's free, right? So, curiosity, the sky is blue. There's some things I can do with that that's perfectly good science. I could walk out at noon, sky is blue. I have a standard color chart that we use in science that says, okay, today it's blue number 12. Tomorrow I can walk out, 12 o'clock. It's blue number 26. I can start cataloging on each day at a given time what color the sky is. For that matter, I could come out at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. I could do it within a day, within a daylight period, and I can catalog what color the sky is and how it changes throughout that time. Perfectly good science. It's what we call descriptive science. So we describe something to try to better understand what's happening. Now, I haven't asked any deep question or tried to answer any deep question with that. I've tried to catalog this to see, is there some kind of trend? Is there something I can understand by looking at that? That's perfectly good science. I don't have to go any method, so to speak, beyond that. Perfectly good science. On the other hand, oftentimes what happens is we look up, we see the sky is blue, and then we ask one of two questions. And these are two of the most important words in the English language, not just in science, just in the English language in general. And that's to ask how and to ask why. Those two questions are fundamental in a lot of things. Now, hopefully you start to see how certain things with faith and science can start to tie in with the way we try to understand things. And so I look up and I say, okay, the sky is blue. I want to know how. And this gets back to the hypothesis, the idea of a testable statement. I can make a statement about how does that happen? What kind of mechanism causes that? That's my hypothesis. I want to come up with a statement about how does that sky turn blue? And so I'm going to give you an example and kind of walk with you through that. So just bear with me. So I walk up, I look outside, the sky's blue, and I think, ooh, the sky's blue. I wonder how that is. Then the question itself isn't enough. So now I want a testable statement. The sky is blue because fairies paint it blue at night. Go ahead, let that sink in. Now you're thinking, I'm glad I didn't pay for this, right? Fairies paint the sky blue at night. Is that a testable statement? Absolutely it is. And I'm going to devise a way to test it. Now, I don't sleep very well at night, so here's the way I'm going to do it. I'm going to stay up all night. So I make this statement. Tonight I go home, I stay up all night, peering at the sky, looking for those fairies to come out and paint the sky blue. Lo and behold, in the morning, the sky turns blue. I didn't see a single fairy paint anything. Did I prove that fairies don't paint the sky blue at night? No, absolutely not. They knew I was there. So they had an alternative method, right? So then I think, okay, I'm going to switch my sleep cycle around. I'm going to sleep in the day, I'm going to stay up at night. Because you know, after about 2 to 3 days of staying up all night, regardless without sleep, you'll start seeing anything. So that doesn't work. So I switched my sleep cycle. And so now I'm getting up, I'm staying up every night. I do it for a whole week, 7 nights. 7 nights. Didn't see a single fairy paint the sky blue. Did I prove that fairies don't paint the sky blue at night? No, absolutely not. I say they knew I was there. So now I get smart because I'm a scientist, right? So I get smart. I start thinking, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I have a plan now. I'm going to go to, well, Walmart doesn't have the best cameras, so I'm going to go to Shields. I'm going to go to one of these places that have the really nice game cameras. Get the nicest infrared camera they have, the one that nothing else can see. I bring it, I set it up, point it to the sky, and it's one that has a lot of memory in it. So I'm going to set it up for a whole year, 365 nights. And I'm going to program it for fairies because they have a setting on that on the really fancy ones, right? And I'm going to point the sky, and I'm going to let it go. 365 nights later, I start logging and reviewing my data like all good scientists do, scattered on their desk, maybe put it in a pile, it depends. And 365 nights, not a single time did a fairy paint the sky blue. Did I prove that fairies don't paint the sky blue? Absolutely not. You know, they had the elves doing it because they knew I had the camera, right? So that is the tentative nature of science. That is why we don't look for proof in science. I don't prove anything in science. I can support my hypothesis or not, and in that case, I have no data to support my hypothesis that fairies paint the sky blue at night. Doesn't mean they don't. I just have no evidence that they do. Now, that could change. Maybe it won't. I'm kind of hoping not. That'll change a lot of things, right? But the idea is there that I don't prove anything in science. Science is a tentative study of the world around us. There are no facts in science. Anything that you call a fact is pretty quickly changed because we understand more because of the tentative nature of science. And so we just kind of have to change the way we think about that. And then this deal about just a theory. I hear this a lot of times. Well, you know, blank, whatever blank is just a theory. Well, if your Aunt Margaret said that and she's not a scientist, maybe that's applicable. But in science, a theory is much more than that. And here's a simple way to think about it. So we say a hypothesis is a testable statement. So we've defined that. So how's a theory really different? A couple of things. First, when I say a hypothesis, you notice I was trying to get at how the sky was blue, right? I was blaming it on the fairies for doing the work of painting it blue. So that was a hypothesis. When we say a testable statement, it's a testable statement that tries to get to the how something works. A theory, on the other hand, takes the information from hypotheses. So a theory is a statement or statements that's built on hypotheses that don't only try to get at the how, but also why it works certain ways. So when we talk about the two of them, a hypothesis, testable statement about how something works, a theory is more of an idea of why it works a certain way, based on our understanding. And I really want to keep that in there, that based on our understanding. And if we want to think about it a little bit about how this actually affects us directly, I'll give you a wonderful example. So I throw this thing up here. What is that for folks that can see it? It's a phone, right? All right, for some of us folks that we're really not that old, I promise you, there was a point in time where a phone was tied to a wall. I don't know if y'all know this. And it had just enough of a cord on it to allow one thing to happen. Wherever it was mounted in the house, it had just enough of a cord so that your mama could see whatever you were doing wherever in the house, and that was it. And if she had shoes on, you better be doing the right thing, or she would have one shoe on and you, well, anyway, that's another story. But what have we done with some of these things, with the process of science, working through trying to better understand these things? So even before that, then you hit the big time. You got the long cord that was like, I don't know, go from here to the speaker over there. That was really cool. You're just waiting for the Cadillac to show up in the yard after that one. And you were on the big time, right? And another way to look at these is to think about it like this. And this is a whole nother topic, but if I look at the amount of computing technology that's in a phone today, just a regular smartphone, whatever brand it is, we're not going to argue operating systems, that's another day, but anyway. If you look at the computing technology in that thing, that little box, it's about tenfold what it took to put a man on the moon in the 60s. Substantially advanced technology from that. And then we'd do memes and cat videos, but anyway. That's another topic as well. So now, thinking about this idea of a hypothesis, and it's just a theory. So hopefully that gives you a little different idea of a hypothesis, a testable statement. I'm looking at how something works. A theory is building on those hows to try to get at the why. That's what really happens in science. And it's all a process of working through that. It's a continual thing that happens. It's not some kind of cookbook. You do this, you do this, you do this, and if it explodes, you go back to number one and start, unless you meant for it to explode, and then that's cool, but then you're right. It doesn't work that way. It's a continual thing. We're working through ideas in science just like we're told to work through our faith. So now what I want to do is kind of go back and let's look at the definition for science again. So just kind of remember that, fairly concise, nice little paragraph with a lot of big words in it. Now, I want to show you from the same website, let's look at the definition for faith. All right, that's the first part of it. And when I read this, I was like, oh, Lord. The first part of faith talks about blah, 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 politicians. We're in trouble already, right? A lot of verbiage in there. First time we see trust and a lot of words and stuff. And faith restores faith in politicians. Really, let's go to the next part of it. The second definition. Finally, somebody should have switched those, right? But so when we talk about a strong belief in God, so now we start bringing in words like belief and faith and things of that nature that we don't talk about in science. Well, I'll get to a little bit more of why that is in a minute, but of course, if I had a meme for science, I have to have at least one for faith, right? So here we go. This is the best I could find. This should tell you something. It's probably a good thing. We have all these science memes, and we have very few people wasting their time on memes and faith, so maybe that's a good thing. But we have this meme, and as you kind of look through that, I'm like, boy, I would like to say this is what we do on this day. This is what we do on the next day. And no, most of the time we're cleaning toilets if we're doing the job we're told, right? We're kind of purposed with a job, with faith, with our faith. As you work through that faith and begin to understand it, we are to be the people washing the feet and doing the work, not the people that are sitting there taking advantage of it. And in a way, that's kind of how science works. In science, we have to do the work to try to get the answers, or otherwise we just make things up. And that does happen too, sadly. So as I move past this, we kind of get down to this kind of question. So why the divide? Well, I put the divide in quotes for a very good reason. There shouldn't be one. What we're really doing is we're using a lot of the same methods in science that we should be using in faith. Some years ago, I had somebody basically just kind of, I guess for lack of better terms, kind of call me on my faith, if you will. And they did that in a way because, well, I'm a scientist, I have a PhD, and then I came from the deep south, southern Arkansas. So, of course, you know, the day you're born, they don't even let you out of the hospital without giving you a Bible and all that kind of stuff, right? And you're supposed to start reading it when you get home, and on and on it goes. And so there was a misconception there because of where I was from, not really knowing me very well. The idea was that, well, you know, you have what oftentimes you'll hear termed as a hand-me-down faith, or you just accept things because, that's what people say. Okay, that's good enough for me. That's not what faith is about. And I had to help this person understand that, no, in fact, I struggled a lot in graduate school. I was saved at an early age. My family were not church attenders like you think of people attending church on a regular basis, so I was not raised in a church environment in that way. And then I get to graduate school where you're hit with all this wonderful stuff and these ideas and people that think, oh, if we can't figure this out, then, then there can't be an answer. It's kind of the construct that's in some people's minds. There even went so far as to say, well, in science, and I use science loosely here, there's this idea of, they call it invoking the God principle. And the idea is pretty straightforward. It's like, well, when we get to a point that we can't understand something, then what we're going to do is say, well, that's God. And that was one of the things I got hit with. It's like, well, okay, we know that when you kind of get to the point of what you can't understand, you say that's God. And so what I did was I was kind of standing in a place where I could do it. We had a window, and I said, well, what do you see sitting right outside that window? This is a tree. Yeah, okay, well, that's a tree. I said, here's the deal. As a trained plant physiologist, morphologist, systematicist, I've worked in genetics, blah, blah, blah. I go through all the list of all my credentials that are directly related to plants. I can tell you I can understand a lot about that tree that you see right out there in front of you. I can't make one. That's where we start to make the jump. I don't need a point where my understanding stops to invoke a God principle. God is in everything I do, every day, everywhere around me. And understanding that helps me to better understand some of the things that I do in science. So as we kind of think about this why the divide, there shouldn't be one, is kind of my point with that. And so as we look at this kind of last couple of slides, kind of a last point that I'd like to make, is here's really the thing. First of all, the questions aren't the same. If you're using so-called science questions to try to answer faith, as we'd say back home, you ain't doing it right. We can use a similar process of working through to better understand, to better equip ourselves to deal with things. But I can't ask the same kind of questions. Back to that whole thing. I can start to kind of build evidence in my life of God's work. I can see evidence in other people's lives of God's work. But in the end, when we look at it from the statistics point, I'm a number one. I'm an N of one. So I'm a pretty small sample size. But that's where I build my faith on what God has done for me. And I do see God's work in other people as well, but specifically in me. And one of the last things is this idea of our understanding is limited. So we have a number of people in here that are involved in construction or have done some work in construction. And I could very simply, if I said, okay, guys, I want to figure out how big this room is. So I say that, there'd be people getting up with their tape measure. Okay, it's this many feet long, this many feet wide, this many feet tall. I can come up with a number very quickly of just how big this room is, the volume of it, so to speak. And I can also, in that same amount of time that's passed, I can have an understanding of how long that took in time. I'm talking about 4 dimensions there: length, width, height. I have to watch how I say width and how many fingers I'm holding up. Length, width, height, and time, right? I can kind of understand how those things are intertwined together. And boy, that sounds great. Well, I was talking with a friend of mine that is in a lot of like higher level plant physiology. He's working with chlorophyll and photosynthesis and carbon loads and all this stuff, and on it goes. And something dawned on me about this understanding being limited. So we've known for a long time that when we look at light, incoming light from the sun, that plants use very little of that. They only use about 5% of that light coming in out of 100%. And out of that 5%, they're only using a couple of real small parts of what we call the visible spectrum, what we can see, right? So just a little bit of it is all they're using in photosynthesis. And pretty much every model that we built, try to understand how that works, was built on within the wavelengths that we can see. This is what we know plants utilize. And this guy was thinking about that, and it's like, okay, as some of y'all may know this, there's this thing called the electromagnetic spectrum. And so in other words, there's energy that's below the red light that we can see, infrared, you may have heard of that, and down, lower energy. And then you can go higher energy above the violet, the good old UV radiation and things of that nature, X-rays and all that stuff. So there's a whole lot of this incoming energy from the sun that we don't have a clue about. We don't feel it. It goes right through us. It might warm us up a little bit, but that's about the size of it. We can't sense the vast majority of what's coming in from the sun, just a small little chunk of it. And so he devised a system to actually look at some of that other stuff. He devised a system that would actually pick up infrared in these plants, pick up UV and above in these plants, and then started graphing this out. And what he realized pretty quickly, plants are a lot smarter than we are. They can utilize a lot of that we had no clue existed. We can't sense, but they can, and they use it in some way. So our understanding is limited. And when we try to use the same ideas of trying to put God in a box, for lack of better terms, try to use our limited understanding to understand the God that created all the stuff around us, I know that he's somewhere up there going, because he's so much more than that. And we are so limited in trying to understand what's actually happening. And so I'm going to kind of close with this last kind of image, if you will, that'll kind of sum that up in a sort. And it looks like this. If you try to come in with this mindset that science is going to prove something, it's truth, or if it's some kind of set of facts, this is what you're going to stand there, and this is what's going to happen. You're going to stand there and watch the world that God's created around you spin and turn around you and all the beautiful things that happens, and you're just going to stand there and be mad about it. So with that, I'd like to close, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you, brother. Our faith is an intelligent faith. Never be afraid to ask questions. Never be afraid to find answers. Never. Now, so many times, he kept saying, talking about science and there's no, facts, whatever it is. Now, Scripture is different than that. God is different than that. There are some facts. There are some things. And so when the Bible talks about some facts and it asks us to accept by faith, it's not saying here's a testable question, as in a theory or a hypothesis that you can just, maybe it's true. Why don't you do an experiment to figure it out? It's saying, by faith will you receive this. And it's a fact. But by faith, you have to. It's God's grace to you, and by faith we receive. But it's not the kind of thing that will work for some and won't work for others. It's a fact. Now, let me pause there for a second. what happens sometimes is we hear people that we think, well, they're scientists, or we read books, or we watch Discovery Channel or on TV, and these things come off as experts, or they're real intelligent, whatever it is. I need you to just remember that when the Bible would say that God's ways are not our ways and his ways are higher than our ways, those kind of things, never allow, no matter who we're talking about's mind, to be put at the level of God's, right? And as Jimbo was just speaking about how we understand these many concepts and these many ways of understanding, but there's so many things that we don't even understand. We understand like 4 types of things, and height and width and all these kind of things, but there's so many other things that we can't even understand. And we talk about the plant and sun rays and things like that. God is way beyond. The dimensions of God are way beyond our understanding, right? So always give space for the mystery of God. But here's what I want you to understand, is that faith is not meant to be dumb or insecure or afraid. It's meant to be intelligent. If you're a parent, and let's say you had a small child, you want your small child who does not have the ability to understand all there is to know about you as a parent, but you want them to have an absolute faith in you. They don't even know what questions to ask, but you want them to have an absolute faith in you. You want them to trust you. God, as our Heavenly Father, wants us to have an absolute faith in him. As the toddler gets older, sometimes they go through stages where the parent seems to get dumb to them. You know what I mean? Some of you are there right now where your teenager thinks you are the dumbest person who ever walked. Right? And then there's a place where all of a sudden you hit a certain age when you realize your parents weren't quite as dumb as you thought they were. Right? And some of us do exactly the same thing with our Heavenly Father. We're young in our faith, and we love Jesus, and he loves us, and it's great. And then we go through struggles, our faith, our immaturity, and our whatever. And sometimes we have all these questions, and we get kind of whatever. But if you'll continue to walk, there's a place where you'll come and realize that he's exactly who he said he was. That he's trustworthy and he's true. That his promises are real. That he's not asking you to lay down your intelligence. He's asking you to trust him. You can test him. You can walk with him. And some of those things, I mean, it's not like I don't have time to get into it today, but, like with Gideon, when God asked Gideon to do something really crazy in Judges chapter 6, you can read that another day. And Gideon said, okay, God, if that's really true, why don't you do it this way? And in that example, God did that for him. And then Gideon says, okay, God, kind of like the test example. Okay, well, just in case that was okay, God, okay, let's flip-flop it, let's do it a different way. And so God did it that way. There are times that God will allow you to test him that way. And that's kind of like a science experiment, right? And what will happen is as you continue to take steps, those next steps we talk about, as you continue to take next steps, your faith will continue to grow, because as God stretches you, as you take next steps, as you test God, he will evidence himself to you. He will prove himself to you. Your faith will go because as you take steps, as you test him, he will prove faithful. He will confirm those steps. So, I'm going to close this prayer. We're going to worship. For all of our campuses, and those watching our iCampus for that matter, if you have questions, I'll send an email tomorrow, but you can do them today now. You can round them out, whatever it is. But if you have questions, specific science questions particularly, make sure you get those to us, and we'll process those, get those to Jimbo, and we'll be answering those questions soon. Let's pray, and then we're going to worship. Father, God, we thank you that faith is not based on wishfulness or emotion or hopefulness, But God, it's based on a fact of a cross and a resurrection and a God that loves us. God, thank you. God, I thank you that you don't ask us to lay down our intelligence to walk in faith. That you're not intimidated by our intelligence. God, I almost hear you laughing sometimes because we think we're so smart. Kind of like we laugh sometimes when our kids come in and how smart they are. God, thank you. God, so wherever we are on our journey, God, give us eyes to see our next steps. God, give us the courage. For some of us, maybe we need to ask the right question. Maybe we have a science question that we need to ask to help us take our next steps of faith with you, to help us understand you better, to help us take the next steps in chasing after your Savior, the one you sent to us to be our Redeemer. We love you. Thank you for Jesus. In his name I pray. Amen.